Brooke Holland, Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce. A pleasure to have you on board for this conversation with the Peninsula. Let's start by analyzing the outcome of the fifth annual strategic dialogue held between the US and Qatar earlier this year. I mean, when we talk about both these nations being exemplified for their strategic partnerships on a global scale, how do you see the commercial ties enhancing now that we are halfway through the year?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the commercial ties are very important, right? And they're key to what we, I think, function as an organization. And I think that we definitely can piggyback off of the great success that was the fifth annual strategic dialogue. One thing that I love about the dialogue is that it really brings together the private sector and the government entities from both sides to really talk about, what can we do moving forward as a whole. So we're already seeing halfway through 2023 a lot of that momentum from the World Cup still propelling us forward. And now we're also seeing a shift on, let's talk about some of Qatar's future initiatives, like let's talk about 2030 vision, right? We're already halfway through 2030 vision timeline from the moment that it was introduced. And so we're really starting to define, what do those pillars mean, right? What does education and education partnership mean? What does sustainability mean? And how can we, as the American private sector, be a stakeholder in those pillars, and how can we help to define those pillars to ultimately reach economic success for the US and Qatar here in Qatar?
Qatar, as we speak now, is a very optimistic country in terms of foreign investments. As they are very keen to welcome individuals from far and wide to invest in this country, what measures does the AmCham carry out in fostering U.S. investments in Qatar?
So I think that for the AmCham's perspective, we really rely on how can we support our partners, right? So if you look at our partnership, for example, with Invest Qatar, our partnership with the U.S. Embassy. So we just recently accompanied the U.S. Embassy's delegation to Select USA in Washington, D.C., where the entire purpose of that, right, is investment. Now it's the inverse, but again, whenever you look at the inverse of investment into the U.S., you also look at those delegations and bringing that investment here into Qatar. And that's where our partnership with, folks like Invest Qatar, Qatar Financial Center, it's really allowing those U.S. companies who are entertaining investment here, or who know they want to invest here but don't know quite the right market or how to go about the process. That's where we really rely on giving them the resources. So I think that question specifically, we rely on a lot of our partners for that. And so that's how we facilitate that growth and how we do our part, right? And then once they get here, we try to make sure they flourish. So we give them the resources in order to get here and get established, and through our member companies, through our Qatar partners, through our US partners. But then once they're here, we're doing our part to make sure that those industries and that company is growing. So whereas, we have a lot of the biggest global US company names in our membership, right? We have Microsoft, we have ConocoPhillips, we have Exxon, we have Boeing, Raytheon, Marriott. But my priority and AmCham's priority are, what are those companies doing here in Qatar locally? So whereas, yes, I care about the global success of Microsoft, what can we do to help Microsoft Qatar? And so that's where we, as the AmCham, have that niche of how do we help success here.
And during a recent interview with me, the U.S. ambassador to Qatar highlighted that AmCham, let me quote this for you, ensures new companies understand the road ahead of them and maximizes opportunities. He also said that the organization plays a key role in bridging businesses and creates a huge impact in Qatar. Well, I know you certainly do agree with these statements, but how significant do you think is the collaboration between the U.S. Embassy and AmCham with regards to what the ambassador has said?
I would say that our relationship and our partnership with the embassy is one of the key components that make us who we are as an organization. Of course, I agree absolutely wholeheartedly with what Ambassador Davis said, and we are so fortunate to have an ambassador like Ambassador Davis, who fosters and facilitates U.S. growth here, and who's willing to partner with our non-political, non-governmental organizations like the American Chamber of Commerce here in Qatar. So we're very fortunate, one, to have a great ambassador, but two, to have that open door and open partnership. As far as how key that is, our organization, our mission at its core is to facilitate trade, commerce, and investment between the U.S. and Qatar. And so that relationship, us as a non-governmental, non-political organization, them as a governmental organization, we kind of go hand in hand to have conversations and spare resources that the other one maybe can't give businesses. The other one can kind of fill that gap. And so, again, I go back to, not only is it significant, but I think it's key to what we do for our companies, because I feel like you definitely do see the oil and gas growth, right? It's the Middle Eastern, Arab region. They have enough oil and gas reserves. LNG is huge. They just signed the LNG train deal with CP Chem, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, with Qatar Gas. There's no question that the oil and gas industry here is a great sector. But I also like to talk about, to your point, some of the lesser known growth sectors here that are pretty robust as well. So one, I'd be remiss if I did not talk about just the growing tech sector. I mean, you look at Google, you look at Microsoft, and you look at the data centers that have been implemented, the first ones of their kind in the region, right, that have happened just over the past year. I mean, that's huge. I mean, they really are becoming a global hub, not only for goods, but also in the data and data privacy space. And I think that that's huge and paramount whenever you look at all the data that just came in from the World Cup, right? There was a lot of talk with the U.S. private sector of, how is that data housed? What are we doing with it? Are we, really focusing on data privacy? And they were. And so I think that definitely if you look into the tech sector, you look at AI, you look at data privacy, you look at all of those aspects, and the tech sector is flourishing in Qatar. Another lesser known one, I think, is if you look at healthcare. I mean, so what we've had, the View Hospital, Al-Fardan, Northwest, partnered with Northwestern Hospital. We have some great top-of-the-line Western hospitals, quite frankly. And, obviously there's some great local hospitals as well, but I think if you look and you're specifying in the American private sector, you really do see a lot of Western healthcare focus as well. And so it's really interesting that we see a lot of investment coming from Abbott. We see a lot of investment, again, with the View Hospital, and you look at their approach to patient care where it's they've really spared almost no expense in making sure the patient is centralized and they get the care they need in their hospital, where it's not divided by floors. It's okay, we're going to put this patient on this floor and everything they need is going to be right here, no matter what the cost and situation of that is. And I think that you look, it's partners with Cedars-Sinai, which is a Southern California-based organization. And so I think it's very clear that you can see that Western influence and American influence coming into the healthcare sector here. Of course, you have your normal suspects. You have the defense industry. They're going to continue to grow here. You have the infrastructure industry. They're going to continue to grow here. Even though we're past building stadiums, we're repurposing stadiums, right? You look and there's construction, I feel like everywhere you look, almost in Qatar right now, because, we're really growing that infrastructure here. And you look at a lot of those signs, and it's Parsons and Jacobs are usually the main contract holders. One, I think, wildcard industry that's interesting to talk about and that is worth noting is hospitality. So with our hospitality partners, we really try to drill down and find out, what are some of their initiatives outside of their beautiful hotels, right? Of course, they have beautiful hotels, they have beautiful spaces, they have fabulous restaurants. But a lot of them, Marriott, Hilton, other global brands, they have additional initiatives they want to achieve as well. They also care about sustainability. They also care about, their global branding outside of their hotels and how that can work together. And so I think that especially now that you saw such an influx of hospitality due to the World Cup, now you've got a massive influx of that sector here, and I'm really curious to know and to see what are they going to do with it now, right? How is that industry going to thrive, and what more is the hospitality industry going to do now that we've seen that big push, all these new beautiful hotels? What's next for that industry here? And I think that, there's a lot of growth there to come, and we're definitely excited to be a part of that as well.
Right. You represent the largest section of the U.S. Private sector firms in this country. You support the U.S. ventures to contribute to Qatar's economy, and also works closely with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce back in Washington, D.C. Having partnered with these organizations, what are some of the initiatives AmCham will be carrying out in the coming period to strengthen the American presence here in Qatar?
Right. So one thing that we as AmCham like to do is we like to be facilitators of conversations that maybe, quite frankly, other folks might not be able to have, right? As a non-political, non-governmental organization, that I've mentioned before, we can wedge our way into conversations, especially with our members, whenever we all kind of come together as industry, that's easier for us. So one, we had our inaugural sustainability summit this past year, right? And that was a huge success. We had roughly 7 panels all throughout the day. We partnered with a lot of the universities, so we had everyone from students talking about the future of sustainability here in Qatar to, again, our tech folks, our oil and gas folks, our infrastructure folks, our hospitality folks, our shipping and logistics folks, like DHL, UPS, talking about, what are they doing in that industry. And the goal of that summit was really to talk about sustainability. And, you have your silos in industry, right? You ask Raytheon Boeing, what does sustainability mean to them? And you're going to get a very different answer than if you ask that question to, Citibank, Exxon, to Marriott, to insert company or Cisco, right? You get very different answers depending on what industry and what company you ask. And so our goal with that is to bring everyone together, because that's something that is unique to our organization, is we bring the private sector together as a whole to facilitate open, siloed conversation. And so we're definitely going to continue to do that next year. Again, is having that conversation. Another thing that we're going to do is we're really going to put a focus on corporate social responsibility. So you'll see later in the year, we're going to start shifting our big annual Thanksgiving event to a corporate social responsibility gala. And we're going to start recognizing U.S. companies for their work they're doing here in Qatar, what they're doing in the region, and start, rewarding them and recognizing them, for those initiatives and those things they're doing. Because again, those are things that we care about as the U.S. private sector, and so we should start having those conversations more openly. Another thing that we do is we've started implementing ministry roundtables. So MSIT is probably one that we've done the most of. We're also working on doing one with Ministry of Public Health, a few others, but it's roundtables to discuss issues that we feel the government here in Qatar, need to be aware of for U.S. private sector to flourish, and that works both ways too, right? The ministries also want to know what issues does the American private sector face, what issues might be stunting growth, or the counter is what issues and what is Qatar doing to help flourish growth and what's working so they can keep doing it. And so that's another thing that we've managed to do, is really having that open dialogue with the ministries. And the beautiful thing about those is they're usually closed door sessions, right? And so it's a Chatham House rules where you're in that room and you're talking with the heads of these American companies and the heads of these ministries, and it's a real candid conversation about, hey, what can we all do again to support the economy here? And so those are whenever I say that we can, I think, push the envelope on some of the conversations and some of the things that we're doing and be a facilitator, those are the things that we're trying to do and that we're definitely going to continue to do, since we've seen some success so far with that.
Ruth Holland, Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for talking to the Peninsula.
Absolutely. Thank you.